In a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Atlanta, a routine traffic stop on a warm September evening would expose not just racial profiling, but a shocking web of police misconduct that made national headlines. The dashcam footage shows Officer Thompson, badge gleaming under the streetlights, approaching a well-maintained black Mercedes with such confidence that you'd think he already knew what he'd find. The driver, a well-dressed black man in his mid-30s, remained remarkably composed as he handed over his license and registration. His calm demeanor would later make sense. This wasn't his first time dealing with law enforcement, though not in the way these officers assumed. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Thompson's voice carried that familiar authoritative tone, one that millions of viewers would later dissect in countless social media debates. What happened next was captured in high definition by both body cameras and cell phones of stunned onlookers. 2 additional patrol cars arrived, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. The officers conducted what they called a routine search of the vehicle. The driver stood silently, hands clasped behind his head, watching as they tore through his immaculate car. Then came the triumphant shout from one of the officers, "Found something." A small bag of white powder, mysteriously discovered in a compartment that had been empty moments before. The driver's expression didn't change. If anything, a slight smile crossed his face. He waited until the handcuffs were halfway to his wrists before speaking. "Before this goes any further," he said, his voice steady, "you might want to call my supervisor at the Drug Enforcement Administration." The sudden silence was deafening. "I'm a federal agent conducting an internal investigation into police corruption in this district." The body camera footage shows Officer Thompson's face drain of color. The other officers froze, the handcuffs dangling uselessly from trembling fingers. What they didn't know was that this routine traffic stop was being monitored by multiple federal agencies, with surveillance vans parked just around the corner. This incident would spark a sweeping investigation that would eventually lead to the exposure of systematic misconduct within the department. But on that night, as the DEA agent straightened his tie and retrieved his federal badge, he was thinking about how many others had stood in his shoes without the protection of a badge to save them. The story captured America's attention not just because of its dramatic twist, but because it peeled back the layers of a problem that has plagued our justice system for generations. It raised uncomfortable questions about power, accountability, and the thin line between law enforcement and law-breaking. In the days that followed, security footage from the police station would reveal another fascinating chapter of this story as internal affairs investigators arrived to collect evidence. But that's where our story takes an even more surprising turn. Body camera footage, police reports, and courthouse documents would piece together a tale that reads more like a Hollywood script than real life. Yet every detail I'm about to share has been verified through multiple sources, painting a picture of corruption, redemption, and justice that would change one police department forever. This is a story about more than just a traffic stop gone wrong. It's about the courage to stand up against systemic abuse, the power of accountability, and the long road toward rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. But first, let's go back to where it all began, 6 months before that fateful traffic stop, when a series of suspicious arrests caught the attention of federal investigators. 6 months earlier, in a dimly lit office at the DEA's Atlanta Field Division, Special Agent Thomas Richardson studied a wall covered with photos and sticky notes. A pattern had emerged from dozens of traffic stop reports, all involving minority drivers, all resulting in drug charges, and all following suspiciously similar scenarios. "The numbers don't add up," Richardson explained to his superior, Deputy Director Sarah Chen. "We've got a 300% increase in drug arrests in this district over the past 8 months, but our surveillance shows no spike in actual drug activity. Something's not right." The DEA had received anonymous tips from within the department itself, whispers of evidence being planted, of quotas being filled through fabricated arrests, of lives being destroyed to pad statistics. But proving it would require more than just circumstantial evidence. What caught Richardson's attention wasn't just the surge in arrests, but the timing. The spike began shortly after the appointment of a new police captain, Robert Wells, who had transferred from another district under mysterious circumstances. Wells had brought with him a core group of officers who seemed to operate with unusual autonomy. Body camera footage from these arrests showed a disturbing pattern. Certain officers would consistently find drugs in locations that had already been searched by their partners. The discoveries always happened just out of frame, with the cameras conveniently shifting away at crucial moments. The DEA assembled a task force working closely with the FBI's Civil Rights Division. They began building profiles of the officers involved, tracking their movements, and monitoring their bank accounts. What they discovered was troubling. Several officers had made substantial cash deposits following these arrests, always just under the reporting threshold. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young patrol officer, fresh out of the academy, reached out to Internal Affairs. She had witnessed something during her training that kept her up at night. A senior officer showing rookies where to hide insurance policies and their patrol cars, small packages that could be planted if they needed to make something stick. The investigation had to be handled delicately. One wrong move could tip off the corrupt officers and send them underground. The decision was made to launch an undercover operation, but this would be different. Instead of trying to catch the officers in the act of buying or selling drugs, they would catch them in the act of planting evidence. That's where our DEA agent came in. For weeks, he established a routine, driving the same route at the same time in an expensive car, making himself an irresistible target. His car was equipped with hidden cameras, and every inch was meticulously documented before each drive. The trap was set. But what the investigators discovered went far beyond their initial suspicions. Hidden microphones picked up conversations between officers that suggested this wasn't just about drug arrests. There were hints of connections to local politicians, deals with defense attorneys, and a complex web of payoffs that reached into unexpected places. The corruption had created an invisible tax on the community, destroying lives and careers while enriching a select few. Families had been torn apart, homes lost, and futures derailed based on fabricated evidence. The scale of the injustice was staggering. As the undercover operation continued, tension mounted within the department. Someone had noticed the federal surveillance, and paranoia began to spread. Officers started turning on each other, making mistakes, getting sloppy. The night of that traffic stop wasn't chosen at random. It was carefully orchestrated to catch the officers at their most desperate. But what happened after the handcuffs came out? What was revealed in those tense moments when badge faced badge would shock even the most seasoned investigators. The next phase of this story would reveal just how deep the corruption went, and the extraordinary lengths some would go to keep their secrets buried. As Officer Thompson's face drained of color under the flashing blue and red lights, something unexpected happened. His hand moved not toward his radio to call for backup, but toward his vest pocket. The DEA agent noticed this subtle movement, and his training kicked in. The next few seconds would play out like a high-stakes chess match where every move could change the entire game. "I think we both know this goes way beyond a traffic stop," Thompson said quietly, his voice barely picking up on the body camera. He pulled out not his weapon, but a small notebook. "There are people who won't let this investigation happen. People you wouldn't believe." His hands trembled as he held out the notebook, careful to keep it just out of view of his own body camera. The surveillance vans positioned around the corner caught radio chatter that sent chills through the monitoring team. Multiple unmarked vehicles were converging on their location, but they weren't federal. They were registered to a private security company with known connections to Captain Wells. Inside the notebook, hastily scribbled names and dates outlined a scheme far more sophisticated than simple drug planting. It detailed offshore accounts, shell companies, and a network that stretched from street-level officers all the way to the state capitol. The drug planting wasn't just about arrest quotas. It was about controlling who went to jail and who walked free. The DEA agent had to make a split-second decision. His extraction team was ready to move in, but Thompson's intel could blow the case wide open. The approaching vehicles were now visible at both ends of the street, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Time was running out. What happened next would be debated in law enforcement circles for years to come. Officer Thompson's dash cam caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows behind the Mercedes. Someone was watching, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The officer's eyes widened as he recognized the figure. The radio crackled with static, then a voice cut through. "All units, be advised. Federal agents on scene." But these weren't federal agents at all. The DEA surveillance picked up unauthorized police frequencies being used, frequencies that hadn't been active since a series of unsolved evidence room break-ins 3 months earlier. As tensions escalated, the true nature of the corruption began to unravel in real time. Thompson wasn't just a dirty cop. He was a man trapped in a system that had spiraled far beyond his control. His notebook contained something else, something that would explain why Captain Wells had been so desperate to maintain control of this particular district. The surveillance team watched in growing alarm as more vehicles approached, boxing in both the DEA agent and Officer Thompson. The next few moments would determine not just the fate of this investigation, but potentially the lives of everyone involved. The corruption they had uncovered wasn't just about planted drugs. It was about power, control, and a conspiracy that had been growing in the shadows of law enforcement for years. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing closer by the second. But were they friend or foe? The DEA agent's hand moved slowly toward his phone, ready to send a pre-arranged signal that would bring in tactical teams. Officer Thompson's eyes darted between the approaching vehicles and the shadows behind them, knowing that what he was about to reveal would change everything. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not just a corrupt police department, but a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for years. As the headlights grew brighter and the sirens louder, no one present could have predicted the shocking chain of events that was about to unfold. The approaching vehicles suddenly cut their lights, plunging the street into an eerie darkness broken only by the patrol cars' flashing lights. Through the shadows, figures emerged, but they weren't the backup anyone expected. Leading them was Captain Wells himself, wearing plain clothes and a bulletproof vest that didn't bear any police insignia. The DEA agent's earpiece crackled with an urgent message. Their surveillance network had gone dark. Someone had deployed a signal jammer, cutting off communication with the backup teams. This wasn't just a corrupt police operation anymore. This was a professionally orchestrated ambush. Officer Thompson's hands shook as he flipped to the last page of his notebook. "They've been watching me since I started gathering evidence," he whispered. "But they don't know about the flash drive." His words were interrupted by the sound of approaching helicopters, their searchlights sweeping across the neighborhood. Captain Wells approached with the confidence of someone holding all the cards. "I see you've met our problem, officer," he called out, his voice carrying an unsettling calm. "Thompson's been making some wild accusations lately. Stress of the job, you understand. We're here to take him in for a psychological evaluation." But what Wells couldn't have known was that Thompson's notebook contained more than just evidence of corruption. Hidden in its pages was proof of something far more sinister. A connection between the department's drug planting scheme and a series of mysterious disappearances that had plagued the city's legal system. Defense attorneys who'd gotten too close to the truth, witnesses who'd agreed to testify, all vanishing without a trace. The DEA agent's training kicked in as he assessed the situation. The approaching figures weren't just corrupt cops. Their movements and formations suggested military or private security background. This was a professional hit squad disguised as law enforcement. Suddenly, Officer Thompson's radio came to life with a voice that made Captain Wells freeze in his tracks. It was the voice of someone who was supposed to be dead, a former internal affairs investigator who'd allegedly committed suicide 6 months ago. The message was brief. "Operation Clean Slate is still active. Courthouse basement. Safety deposit box 247. The revelation sent shockwaves through both sides of the standoff. The supposedly dead investigator had been building a case all along, working deep undercover with federal authorities. Every planted drug, every falsified report, every corrupt deal had been documented and stored in a location Wells couldn't reach. As if on cue, genuine police sirens began approaching from all directions. The FBI's tactical team, having detected the signal jammer, had switched to their backup frequencies. Wells's team started to scatter, but they weren't running from law enforcement. They were running from something else, something that made even these hardened operators look scared. In the chaos that followed, Security cameras from nearby buildings captured a scene that would be analyzed for months to come. Multiple unmarked vehicles converged on the location, but they weren't all law enforcement. Among them was a black SUV carrying someone whose presence would blow the case wide open, a high-ranking state official whose connection to the corruption would shake the foundations of local government. The DEA agent, reading the situation, realized that this wasn't just about cleaning up a corrupt police department anymore. They had stumbled onto something much bigger, a conspiracy that connected street-level drug operations to the highest levels of state power. And somewhere in that courthouse basement, in safety deposit box 247, was the evidence that could bring it all crashing down. As tactical teams moved in from all directions and helicopters circled overhead, the true nature of Operation Clean Slate was about to be revealed. But the biggest shock wasn't who was involved in the conspiracy. It was why they had gone to such elaborate lengths to maintain control of this particular district. In the chaos of flashing lights and approaching sirens, the contents of safety deposit box 247 revealed a truth more shocking than anyone had anticipated. The supposedly dead internal affairs investigator hadn't just documented the drug planting scheme, she had uncovered a massive money laundering operation using the seized assets from falsified drug arrests to fund a shadow network of private prisons. The state official's black SUV attempted to flee but was quickly surrounded by FBI tactical units. As she stepped out with her hands raised, everyone present recognized her, State Attorney General Catherine Morrison, the very person who had been blocking investigations into police corruption for the past 3 years. Captain Wells, realizing his operation was crumbling, made one last desperate move. "You have no idea what you're interrupting," he shouted, pulling out not a weapon, but a phone. One call, and every piece of evidence disappears. But as he reached to dial, Officer Thompson did something unexpected. He laughed. "The evidence isn't in the courthouse," Thompson revealed, his voice steady now. "That was a diversion." While everyone was focused on box 247, federal agents were raiding 7 other locations across the state. The real documents, the entire digital trail, it's already been secured. I have been working with the feds for the past year, building this case piece by piece. The DEA agent's own body camera captured the moment Wells realized he'd been outmaneuvered. The captain's face shifted from confidence to disbelief as police helicopters illuminated the scene with spotlights, revealing dozens of federal agents emerging from their hidden positions. But the biggest revelation came from the flash drive in Thompson's notebook. It contained encrypted files showing that the drug planting operation was just the tip of the iceberg. The corrupt officers weren't just planting evidence, they were protecting a sophisticated network that had been using the department's resources to manipulate criminal cases, ensuring certain defendants went free while others were imprisoned on false charges. Attorney General Morrison's involvement explained how they'd managed to operate so long without detection. Her office had been systematically burying complaints, redirecting investigations, and ensuring any whistleblowers were quickly discredited or silenced. As federal agents moved in to make arrests, the DEA agent noticed something in Wells's dropped phone, a text message thread with an unexpected name. The corruption reached even higher than they'd thought, leading to a prominent federal judge who had been manipulating case assignments to ensure certain evidence never saw the light of day. In the end, it wasn't just about dirty cops planting drugs. It was about power, money, and a system that had been corrupted at every level. The investigation would eventually lead to 37 arrests, including 3 judges, 2 state senators, and 12 high-ranking law enforcement officials. Officer Thompson's role as an inside informant had been crucial, but he paid a heavy price. The stress of maintaining his cover while gathering evidence had taken its toll. Yet his actions had helped expose one of the largest police corruption scandals in recent history. As the dust settled and the arrests continued through the night, one final piece of intelligence came through that changed everything. Hidden in Morrison's encrypted files was evidence of an even larger conspiracy, one that connected similar corruption rings in police departments across 5 different states. This wasn't the end of the investigation. It was just the beginning. The story of a routine traffic stop that exposed a web of corruption would go on to inspire nationwide police reform efforts. But perhaps the most powerful message came from Officer Thompson himself, who, when asked why he risked everything to expose the truth, simply said, "Because wearing this badge means protecting people, not persecuting them. And sometimes protecting people means standing up to the very system you're part of." In the months following the mass arrests, the impact of Operation Clean Slate rippled through law enforcement agencies nationwide. The investigation expanded across state lines, leading to a complete overhaul of evidence handling procedures and internal affairs protocols. Over 200 wrongfully convicted individuals were released, their cases overturned as the full extent of the planted evidence scheme came to light. Officer Thompson, despite pressure to maintain his position undercover, chose to testify publicly. His testimony before a special congressional committee became a viral moment, watched by millions. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence, he told the packed hearing room, his voice unwavering. It was watching good people get arrested, knowing I had to wait to help them. Every night, I reminded myself that bringing down the whole system would help more people than saving one person at a time. The DEA agent who was targeted that fateful night continued working with federal task forces, helping other departments identify and root out similar corruption schemes. His experience became a case study at the FBI Academy, teaching future agents about the complex intersection of racial profiling, police corruption, and systemic abuse of power. Captain Wells and Attorney General Morrison both faced federal charges, but the investigation didn't stop with their arrests. The trail of evidence led to the indictment of two multinational private prison corporations that had been profiting from the fraudulent arrests. Their contracts were terminated, leading to significant reforms in the private prison industry. Perhaps the most significant change came from within the police department itself. Young officers, inspired by Thompson's courage, began speaking out against misconduct they witnessed. The blue wall of silence showed signs of cracking as a new generation of law enforcement officers embraced accountability and transparency. The federal judge implicated in the scandal had presided over thousands of cases, all of which required review. A special task force was established to examine every conviction, ensuring no innocent person remained behind bars due to manipulated evidence or corrupted judicial processes. Officer Thompson declined numerous offers for book deals and movie rights, instead focusing his efforts on establishing a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping exonerated individuals rebuild their lives after wrongful imprisonment. The organization, funded in part by assets seized from the corrupt officials, provided housing, job training, and legal support to those affected by the scandal. The surveillance footage from that night became a powerful training tool, showing future officers how corruption can be confronted from within. But more importantly, it demonstrated that integrity and courage aren't just abstract concepts taught in the academy. They're choices that officers make every day on the streets. In an unexpected turn of events, several of the exonerated individuals joined Thompson's organization, working alongside him to reform the system that had wronged them. Their collaboration became a model for restorative justice programs across the country, proving that healing was possible even after profound betrayal. As for the wider investigation into corruption across 5 states, it continues to this day. Each new revelation strengthens the case for comprehensive police reform, while also highlighting the courage of officers who choose to stand up for what's right, even at great personal risk. The story that began with a routine traffic stop ultimately changed the landscape of American law enforcement. It reminded everyone that real change often starts with one person willing to take a stand, one officer willing to break ranks with corruption, one moment of truth that sets larger forces in motion. And perhaps that's the most important legacy of this case, the reminder that justice isn't just a concept in law books or a word on the side of police cars. It's a choice we make, a stand we take, and a responsibility we all share in making our system work the way it was always meant to work, fairly, honestly, and equally for everyone.